Hello everybody and welcome back to SkySaga Alpha 8. It is time for another Tutorial Tuesday, and today we are going to be talking about selling items and selling off all of the extra bits and pieces you kind of have floating around and you don't really know what to do with. So we're over here with the item trader and we're actually going to have a look at how this whole system works. So basically, if you guys have seen this or not seen this already, we have an item trader now in-game down here by the airships where you first spawn into the City of First Light. And you can sell them pretty much anything you like. Now, as you can see in my inventory, I've got a lot of stuff because we're about to cover a whole bunch of this stuff in detail and explain kind of what that means and what that means to you. Now, first up, we're going to cover a few things that don't give you anything, no matter how much you trade in. So the things that don't give you anything are leaves and dirt and grass. The ones that I've found so far that give you absolutely nothing, no matter how much of them you trade in. There are some items though that when you trade them in, you only get a small percentage back off what you put in. So, for example, sand currently sits at 4-1. Now, what I mean by that is when I go and I harvest out 4 sand, and we give them 4 sand, I get exactly 1 knot back. Now, the interesting thing with this is that when you're doing stuff like this, if you trade in 5 blocks of sand, you're still only going to get the 1 knot back because you can't receive part knots back, which means that while I'm trading in these 5 sand blocks, I should be getting 1 and 1.25 knots, but of course I can't do that, so I only get the 1, which means this is technically a waste. I mean, I know it is not that much, but it's something to make sure of and think about when you're trading stuff in, is especially stuff that has a low trading value. You want to make sure you're trading in equal numbers of it, or nice measurable numbers. So that's sand and things. You've also got stone blocks, and stone blocks sit at 2 stone blocks to 1 knot for all colors of stone, as far as I've seen. And then we've also got other things like wood and all of that kind of stuff. And I'll let you guys go through and have a look at these, but here's a quick guide. Kind of like 4-1 for wood and 1-1 for stone, which means, once again, 2-1 for the actual stone pieces themselves. Now, this is the thing that really interested me, was that building things doesn't actually increase the value of that item. So here we've got a small chest made out of kingswood, and you can see I'll receive 2 knots for that, but I'll also receive 2 knots for the planks, which is what would go into that chest, and I'll also receive 2 knots for the actual logs that go into the planks that go into the chest. So spending all of that extra time crafting something up doesn't actually add any value to it. And as a better example, we've got a grindstone here. So the grindstone will give me 7 knots, and that is 1 knot for the 4 wood rods and 6 knots for the crown stone. So as you can see, building things up does not value add in any way to these things. So the rest of the stuff up here, I've just got some stuff that kind of shows off some other little quirks of the feature. So when you're talking about biome-specific armor and weaponry, if that thing is at 100%, it will give you back just 1 of the Explorer marks. Whereas if you trade it in when it is lower, it will give you a monetary value based on how damaged that item is. Now, the interesting thing that we're going to talk about in a second is that you actually want to trade in damaged items, because 1 Explorer is not worth all that much, and we'll talk about how I know that in just a second. So, of course, all the stuff up here are kind of rare items in the games. These are the ones I want to talk about because they actually, of course, do give you a little bit more monetary value for each of the items. Now, this is a mythic helm, so that's one of the things I've kind of been found or given at some point along the line, and as you can see, having a mythic item gives me 10 settler points, whereas having only a fabled item gives me 1. So explorer points is what I'm trying to talk about here. Now, the gladiator stuff does not give you gladiator points, even when it's at 100%. It only gives you the knots equal, I think, to the amount of material that has gone in. I need to sit down and actually calculate this out. That will be in the description down below. Now, once again, we've got some other kind of very important items up here. Now, the Settler's Dust is some of the highest stuff that you can get. You can get 75 for the higher tier and 37 for the lower tier. The Temporary Dust, I'm going to skip over for a second. The Forest Charms are interesting. They're 150 per. So if you've got a lot of those sitting around and you've already moved on to Heroic and Fablewoods and you're not using your Forest Charms, do come and trade them in, because it is a nice tidy source of currency, and we're actually going to talk about in a few weeks building up a farm to collect some of these and actually start generating a little bit more revenue. Now the fiery hearts sitting a little bit underneath that at 75, and the forest runes are 300. Now of course you would expect this difference between these two because forest runes are harder to get, you have to kill harder enemies, and they have a smaller drop rate as well. So these things are kind of pretty nicely balanced. Now the one things that I honestly feel like they're not all that balanced are the island title scrolls. So as you can see, these things are absolutely insane in terms of how much money they give you back. Obviously, buying these things costs a lot of knots, so you really only want to trade in the ones that you find out in worlds. But they do, if you have some spare, they do give a lot of knots, so it is worth coming in and trading them off. Now, the things that I have skipped up here are my tempering powder and the dark heart. Now, the reason I've skipped these is because these two items are actually for sale up here in the Explorers Guild. Now, the Explorers Guild, the shop does change all the time, but these two things do actually stay in the Explorers Guild shop all the time. And as you can see, when we come up here and talk to this person, we get a dark heart for 4 settlers points, for 4 explorers points, and a tempering powder for 2 explorers points. Now, why this is important is that means that we can actually do a direct translation of how much your explorers points are worth to you in knot terms. So if we come in here and talk to this guy, we'll see that a dark heart costs 125, or will give us back 125, and a tempering dust gives you 75, which means that 2 tempering dusts, if we go and put these two together, gives you 150. Now that means that for your 4 explorers points, you can get 150 knots off of the tempering powder, whereas doing it with the dark hearts you only get 125. So that actually squarely puts the cost of a single explorer's mark at 37.5 knots. So if you've got a lot of explorers knots like I do, so I've got 263 right now, that is a really good way of trading these in and getting knots with that you can actually do other things with. So with my 260, I can actually go ahead and get 9,000 plus knots just for the fact that I have all of these explorers points sitting around doing nothing. All I need to do is go over, buy the tempering powder, and then come over here and trade it in. Some of you may have also noticed that there are actually runes up here for sale, and as we mentioned before, a rune is worth 300 knots, but the price tag of 8 actually means that these things are on exactly the same level as the tempering powder. They'll give you back 37.5 knots per explorer's point that you put in. So realistically, if you're wanting to do this and runes are in the shop, I would personally go out and buy runes, because that way you cut through your explorer's points faster and the retail process is also faster. The final thing to note here is that when you're trading in anything that you've built that you can use, trading it in with a higher durability will give you back more knots. So obviously this demolition pickaxe is going to give me back 31 knots, whereas this demolition pickaxe is only going to give me back 2 knots, because this one is on durability 8% and this one is on 99%. So these things scale down as they start to break and start to wear down, which means that the things that are on 100% or more, or just under, will give you a lot higher percentage than anything on lower durabilities. So that is it for the basics of buying and selling items here. Personally, I would suggest that if you do have some of these things sitting around in chests that you're not doing anything with, bring them over here, use them, trade them in. That way you can kind of refresh your knots, you can buy more islands, you can buy more recipes, you can just buy more bits and pieces for stuff that you have sitting around in chests doing absolutely nothing. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.